clues are small. So small, in fact, that most people miss them entirely. A name quietly dropped from a royal payroll. A country house signed over to family members in a discreet legal transfer. A future king's habit of doing things his own way. On their own, each one is nothing, the kind of administrative detail that barely makes a headline. But put them side by side, and they start to sketch an answer to one of the biggest unanswered questions hanging over the British monarchy. What happens to Queen Camilla when Prince William becomes king? Now let me be honest with you straight away, because there's a lot of overheated nonsense told about this. You'll find no shortage of dramatic stories claiming William has declared secret war on Camilla, that there's a vendetta, a point of no return, a palace battle raging behind closed doors. That version is exciting, and it is mostly exaggerated. The truth is quieter and in many ways more interesting. What the evidence actually points to is not a war but a recalibration, the slow, deliberate turning of a page from one reign to the next, and a future king reshaping the monarchy in his own image. Camilla's place in that new world is genuinely uncertain, but the reasons have far more to do with cold institutional logic than with personal revenge. So let's look at the real clues, one by one, and work out what they actually tell us about the future. The first clue came not in a dramatic confrontation, but in the dry pages of a financial report. For nearly 2 decades, Camilla's sister, Annabel Elliot, held a respected role connected to the royal family. A talented and accomplished interior designer, she had been brought in by King Charles, back when he was Prince of Wales, to decorate and refurbish properties across the Duchy of Cornwall, the vast private estate, worth well over $1 billion, that provides the income for the heir to the throne. For years, Annabel worked on the duchy's luxury holiday cottages and offices, earning fees and commissions for her expertise. It was a prestigious arrangement, and for years there were whispers that it was a clear case of royal connection opening doors, the kind of cozy setup that flourishes when the person in charge is loyal to your sister. Then in September 2022, the Queen died, Charles became king, and William inherited the Duchy of Cornwall along with the title Duke of Cornwall. And under William's management, Annabel Elliot's role simply came to an end. The Duchy's annual report later confirmed that her design services were not retained for the following financial year, and that nothing further was owed to her. There was no announcement, no drama, no public statement. The arrangement just quietly stopped. But here is where the honest version really matters, because this is exactly the kind of fact that gets twisted. This was not a vicious sacking, and it was not, by any fair reading, an act of war against Camilla's family. Every source close to the situation made clear it was no reflection on Annabel's work. The explanation given was straightforward and entirely plausible. Her work across the estate was considered complete, and the staff had learned what they needed from her expertise. And crucially, the relationship was not severed at all. Annabel Elliot reportedly continued to work privately for Charles and Camilla on their personal estates at places like Balmoral and Sandringham. So this was never a banishment, it was a business decision. And yet, even stripped of the drama, that decision tells you something real and important. It reveals William's instinct. Where his father valued loyalty and continuity, keeping trusted people around for years, William's approach to the duchy was about modernizing and streamlining. He looked at an inherited arrangement, decided it had run its course, and ended it, politely but firmly. The message, whether intended or not, was clear. The comfortable setups of his father's era do not automatically carry over into his. Being connected to the royal family, even being the Queen's sister, does not guarantee that the arrangement continues forever. That is the first genuine clue to how William will run things, and it points toward a future that is leaner, tighter, and far less sentimental about inherited privilege. The second clue came years later, in early 2026, and this time it was Camilla making the move. In late February, it emerged through land registry documents that the Queen had quietly transferred ownership of her beloved Ray Mill house. This is the property in Wiltshire that Camilla bought back in 1996 for around £850,000 in the years after her divorce from Andrew Parker Bowles. For her, it has always been far more than a house. It was her sanctuary, the place she lived as a single woman, the home she kept even after she married Charles and moved into royal residences, a private bolt hole where, by all accounts, she could simply be herself and not be a royal. She has spoken warmly of its garden, once describing gardening as the best therapy in the world. The house has hosted family weddings and gatherings. It is, quite simply, the most personal thing she owns. And now, the records showed, she had signed it over to her two children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes, through trustees acting on their behalf. Naturally, the discovery set off a frenzy of speculation. Some of the more excitable reports suggested it was proof of a crumbling marriage, or a desperate bid to shield her assets from a future king who might strip her of everything. It's worth being clear and fair here. Those dramatic interpretations are not supported by the evidence, and sources close to the Queen firmly dismissed the wilder rumors, including talk of a sale. The far more likely and mundane explanation is the one most experts landed on. Camilla is 78 years old. Her husband, the king, is 77 and has been undergoing treatment for cancer. Transferring a personal property to your children at that stage of life is simply sensible estate planning, the kind of thing ordinary families do all the time. Sources framed it as formalizing arrangements within the family and preserving the house's role as a private residence. So no, this is not evidence of a secret divorce or a war. But, and this is the part that genuinely matters for our question, it does reveal something telling about Camilla's mindset. Whatever her motive, the practical effect of the transfer is that her most cherished personal asset is now secured within her own family, legally separate from the institution of the crown. She has made sure that, whatever happens in the next reign, whatever her role becomes, she has a private sanctuary to call her own, beyond the reach of any royal reshuffle. It is a quiet, careful, legally sound piece of forward planning by a woman who clearly understands that the ground is shifting beneath her feet. She is, in her own discreet way, getting her affairs in order before the next chapter begins. To understand why getting her affairs in order is so significant, you need to grasp a structural reality that most people don't realize. Camilla, as queen, does not have her own separate, independent income from the state. Her financial support as a working royal flows through the sovereign grant, the funding that supports the monarchy's official work. And that grant, and how it's used, ultimately answers to the monarch. Right now, that monarch is Charles, her husband, who is devoted to her. But when William becomes king, control of all of it passes to him. Her role, her funding, her residences, her place in the official life of the family, all of it will, in a very real sense, become William's to decide. This isn't a threat or a plot. It's simply how the institution works. But it means the honest answer to what happens to Camilla is, to a remarkable degree, whatever William decides will happen. So what do the people who study this family closely actually expect? The most respected voices are fairly consistent and notably restrained. The royal biographer Christopher Anderson has offered perhaps the clearest read. In his assessment, William essentially tolerates his stepmother, and Camilla, for her part, is a little wary of him. Anderson suggests that when William becomes king, Camilla's role within the monarchy will likely be reassessed. She would probably still appear at some royal events, but the key word there is some. Not a central, powerful, throne-side role of the kind she holds now, but a reduced, occasional presence, taking part at the new king's discretion. There's also the simple matter of titles and precedence. When William is king, his wife Catherine becomes queen. Camilla would step back, likely into a quieter, more private status, the kind of dignified semi-retirement that history has handed to royal widows and dowagers before her. But here is where I want to push back hard against the war narrative, because the honest evidence simply doesn't support it. This is not a story of a vengeful prince plotting to destroy his stepmother. Consider what's actually happened to their relationship in recent years. The two of them have grown notably closer, bonded by one of the hardest experiences a family can share. When both Charles and Catherine were diagnosed with cancer, William and Camilla found themselves united by the same fear and the same duty, each supporting a spouse through illness. Royal experts have noted that through this, William came to genuinely appreciate Camilla's sense of duty and her steadiness. This is not a man consumed by a grudge. This is a future king who has a clear, considered vision for a modern, slimmed-down monarchy, and who is applying that vision consistently to everyone, including his stepmother's family. The decisions are about the institution. They are not about revenge. That distinction is everything, and it's the thing the dramatic versions get completely wrong. It is entirely possible, and in fact most likely true, that two things hold at once. William does not have deep, warm, sentimental feelings for Camilla, and William is acting from institutional logic rather than personal spite. Both can be true. He can respect her without adoring her. He can reduce her role without hating her. The streamlining of the monarchy, the ending of cozy inherited arrangements, the careful management of who gets funded and who gets a public platform, these are policies, not punishments. Camilla just happens to be one of the people those policies will affect. And it helps to remember the bigger picture William is working within, because it makes his reasoning look less like targeting and more like simple necessity. The monarchy he will inherit is under real pressure. There is intense public scrutiny of royal finances and a persistent demand that the institution justify its cost and slim down. At the same time, the family is stretched thin, with fewer working royals available than at any time in recent memory. William has been open about wanting a leaner, more modern, more accountable monarchy, one that does not carry passengers and does not hand out platforms and funding simply on the basis of who you happen to be related to. In a family operating under that philosophy, a queen dowager from the previous reign, along with her extended relatives, is naturally going to feel the squeeze, not out of malice, but because the entire model is being tightened. Camilla's reduced future is, in that sense, just one consequence of a much broader project. She is not being singled out. She is being swept up in a reform that touches the whole institution, from the grandest figures to the most minor royal connections. It would, of course, be naive to pretend the long history between them counts for nothing, because it does color everything. William's caution around Camilla didn't come from nowhere. He was a teenager when his parents' marriage collapsed, and just 15 when his mother, Diana, died. For years, in the eyes of two grieving boys, Camilla represented the woman at the center of everything that had gone wrong. Royal authors have recounted how William and Harry, as teenagers, were less than welcome, reportedly giving her unkind nicknames in their private resentment. The royal author Angela Levin has observed that William does not regard Camilla as a step-grandmother to his children, viewing her simply as his father's wife. The depth of that early unease is captured in the account of their very first proper meeting, which reportedly took place in 1998, when William was around 16, roughly a year after Diana's death. By the biographer Christopher Anderson's telling, Camilla was so terrified of meeting Diana's son that she was shaking like a leaf and needed a stiff drink afterwards to recover her nerves. That single image, a grown woman trembling at the prospect of facing a teenage boy, says everything about the emotional weight that has always sat between them. He held the power in that relationship from the very beginning, and in a sense he always has. The dynamic Anderson describes today, of a stepmother who is a little afraid of her stepson, was set in that first nervous encounter and has never fully gone away. So there is genuine emotional distance there, decades in the making. That history is real, and it surely shapes his instinct to keep her at a certain remove. But emotional distance is not the same as a vendetta. A man can carry the old wounds of his childhood and still make his decisions for sober, institutional reasons. The most accurate picture is of a future king who was never close to his stepmother, who has made a functional peace with her, and who will, when the time comes, quietly reshape her role to fit the leaner monarchy he intends to build. So when you put all the clues together, what does Camilla's future under King William actually look like? The honest, evidence-based picture is this. She will almost certainly step back from the central, powerful position she occupies today. As William builds his slimmed-down monarchy, the expectation is fewer senior royals on the public payroll and stricter rules about who benefits from royal connection. And a queen dowager from the previous reign is a natural candidate for a gentler, more private role. The cozy arrangements of Charles's era, the kind that gave her sister a long-running role at the duchy, are unlikely to survive into William's reign. Her public appearances will likely become more occasional, existing at the new king's discretion rather than as a right. And through it all, she will have her own private sanctuary, now secured for her family to retreat to. Not exile, not disgrace, but a clear and significant diminishing from the heart of the institution to its quieter edges. History, in fact, offers a clear template for exactly this kind of transition, and it's a reassuring one. When a king dies and a new monarch takes the throne, the previous queen consort does not vanish, but she does step back. The most famous modern example is Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. After her husband, King George VI, died in 1952 and her daughter became Queen Elizabeth II, she transformed from queen consort into a beloved but secondary figure, a cherished elder of the family who carried out engagements and was adored by the public, but who held no central power and stood respectfully apart from the new reign. She remained important, but in a fundamentally different, gentler way. That is very likely the shape of Camilla's future too. As the dowager queen of the previous reign, she would be expected to recede from the front line, to make way for the new king and queen, and to occupy a dignified, supporting position rather than a commanding one. There is nothing unusual or cruel about this. It is simply how the monarchy renews itself, generation after generation. The crown moves on, and those of the old reign make space for the new. There is a real poignancy to where this leaves her, and it's worth sitting with. Think about the journey Camilla has been on. For decades, she was one of the most criticized women in Britain, blamed by the public for the breakdown of a fairy tale marriage, the target of open hostility, including from William and Harry themselves. And against all the odds, through patience and quiet, uncomplaining service, she rebuilt her reputation. She became Charles's wife, then his queen, crowned beside him in Westminster Abbey, achieving a level of public acceptance that once seemed utterly impossible. That ascent had been carefully, patiently engineered over many years. When Charles and Camilla finally married in 2005, there was such public sensitivity that her title was deliberately softened, and it was suggested she would one day be known as Princess Consort rather than Queen. For years, that careful compromise held. Then, in February 2022, came the moment that sealed her place in history. Queen Elizabeth II, marking 70 years on the throne, issued a public message stating her sincere wish that, when the time came, Camilla would be known as Queen Consort. It was an extraordinary endorsement from the most respected woman in the country, and it effectively ended the debate overnight. By the time of the coronation in May 2023, even the word consort had quietly been dropped, and she was crowned simply as Queen Camilla, anointed and acknowledged beside her husband. For a woman who had spent decades as the most criticized figure in the country, it was a staggering rehabilitation, the complete journey from outcast to crowned queen, which is precisely what makes the prospect of a quiet decline in the next reign so poignant. She climbed all the way to the summit, and now, at 78, with Charles unwell and the next reign drawing closer, she faces a future in which her standing will rest in the hands of the very person who, as a boy, resented her most. After everything it took to get to the top, she can see the descent coming. And perhaps the most telling thing of all is how she appears to be responding to it, not with a fight, not by clinging to power or making demands, but by doing the quiet, dignified, sensible thing, getting her own affairs in order, securing her private home for her children. preparing by every indication to accept that the next reign will be different and smaller for her. If the property transfer tells us anything about Camilla's state of mind, it is that she is a realist. She understands the institution. She knows how it works, and she knows that her time at the center of it is tied to her husband's. So she is preparing calmly and in advance for a life beyond the spotlight, with somewhere of her own to go. That in the end is the real story hidden inside all those small, quiet clues. Not a dramatic showdown, not a secret war, but a transition as natural and as inevitable as the changing of the seasons. A future king quietly reshaping the monarchy to match his vision, ending the arrangements he doesn't believe in and preparing to run things his own way. And a queen, equally quietly, accepting that the page is turning and making sure she is ready for it. There is an unspoken understanding between these two, a recognition of how things will be. William will decide Camilla's future, and all the evidence from the duchy decision to the property transfer to the words of the experts points the same way. That future will be dignified, but it will be smaller. The woman who fought her whole life to belong at the center of the royal family is, with grace and foresight, getting ready to step quietly toward its edge. And when the new reign finally begins, that may turn out to be the most fitting final chapter of all. Not a queen cast out in a blaze of conflict, but one who saw clearly which way the wind was blowing and chose to bend with it rather than break.